AFN Television News, compiled from the major American networks, wire services, and public affairs offices.
Good evening. I'm PFC Floyd Vasquez.
And I'm Ann Mulligan. After weeks in the doldrums, the first real rally for the dollar. In Frankfurt trading today, the greenback gained 3 pfennigs.
ABC News, the White House.
In West Germany today, Chancellor Helmut Kohl, a firm supporter of American nuclear policy, is talking with Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko. Gromyko is trying to drive a wedge between Western Europe and Washington and is warning Kohl that planned deployment of hundreds of new U.S. nuclear missiles in Germany and other European nations beginning later this year will spark a years-long confrontation. The Soviet-backed Polish government and the Western world have been at odds the past year over martial law restrictions in Poland. Even though many of those restrictions have been lifted, Poland's Cold War with the West continues. Walter Rogers reports the latest incident was a crackdown on journalists that literally put a chill on any chance of free press in that country.
This mass was celebrated for Polish journalists at a time when all reporters here are coming under growing government pressure.
When UPI's Ruth Gruber was expelled from Poland, she flew to West Berlin, and she was interviewed last night in the studios of AFN Berlin, explaining what changes she's seen in the Polish people and their government since martial law was imposed.
There's always been a gap between the people and the government there. I first went to Poland before Solidarity, before the strikes or anything. And already there was an enormous credibility gap. During the Solidarity period, this all came out into the open. And one of the demands of Solidarity was access to the media. And when martial law was imposed, this gap just widened all the further. And now people have their ideas in their head, and they know what they believe what they feel that they can believe, and usually they don't believe the official information.
Tonight at 10, Gruber comments on one possible reason for the current crackdown on reporters in Poland. Pentagon officials say the nuclear reactor...
The U.S. Supreme Court is busy this week handing down decisions, and one of those decisions will affect the court itself. The question of whether people have the right to picket the Supreme Court building in Washington comes up today. In 1981, the Federal Appeals Court ruled any blanket prohibition against demonstrations violates freedom of speech. The High Court has also agreed to take up the case of Donald Kirkpatrick of York County, Nebraska. He has an illegitimate daughter, and the child's mother, who lives in Texas, wants to offer the child for adoption. Kirkpatrick would like to keep the child himself. When the High Court rules on this case, it will be a landmark decision on the rights of all fathers in such cases. The justices said they are not interested in hearing more about the Lindbergh kidnapping case of 47 years ago, and Hauptmann is suing several parties claiming they conspired wrongfully to convict her husband of kidnapping the child of the famed aviator. The justices refused to disqualify the federal judge hearing the case, and this is Hauptmann's claim he once practiced law with a former member of the Hauptmann prosecution team. And
a growing number of Americans own video cassette recorders, and the Supreme Court today may make a decision that will affect just how expensive a hobby tape collecting could be in the future. Tim O'Brien reports that the movie industry is not happy that their profits are being pirated away.
They're getting ripped off by home video recording. Tim O'Brien, ABC News, Washington.
Singers Kenny Rogers, Lionel Richie, Aretha Franklin, and the group Kool and the Gang added another American Music Award to their trophy cases in last night's ceremonies in Los Angeles. Other recipients included soul singer Marvin Gaye, the country rock group Alabama, and Daryl Hall and John Oates. From the stars in music to the stars in sports, Army Sergeant Doug Pritchett, tell me about those college basketball stars.
Well, there's been a lot of movement in the top 10 this week. The game of musical chairs continues in the sports world. Ann?
Well, that's the ranking on the teams across the nation. May we get a ranking on our cities here in Germany weather-wise. James, I always wondered, what's the snowiest and coldest city here in Germany?
Yeah, that would be about Munich.
Munich?
Right.
And how about the warmest? Which one has the best temperatures?
Frankfurt.
Why is that?
Over lower altitude for the most part.
Oh, good for us.
Yes, but unfortunately, we've had some sort of cool temperatures right now, and most of the warm temperatures, in fact, right today have been in the southern portion of Germany after this.
Abrams tank, a new breed in Europe.
Rick Interfirth, ABC News, Washington.
At midterm, the president has to start thinking about another important factor, re-election. President Reagan has not given the nod yay or nay to that decision, but the president's opposition is already hard at work looking forward to the 1984 elections. Sander Van Oker reports the Democrats were talking presidential politics this weekend in California.
Presidential politics picked up this weekend in California just where they left off in 1980. Their appetites and their ambitions only heightened by their sense that finally Ronald Reagan may have become politically vulnerable. Sander Van Oker, ABC News, Sacramento.
U.S. envoy Philip Habib is meeting today with Israeli Foreign Minister Yitzhak Shamir to plot the course of future negotiations with Lebanon. The next session is to be held Thursday in Israel. A seventh round concluded yesterday with Israeli officials saying negotiations are close to reaching a declaration ending the state of war between Israel and Lebanon. The Soviet Union may be getting more involved in the Mideast. U.S. intelligence sources cite several indications, including the arrival of a new Soviet long-range anti-aircraft missiles in Syria. They also believe computer and satellite equipment used for contacting Moscow is ready to be shipped to Syria. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher faces charges in Parliament today that her government's botched intelligence work kept Britain from predicting that Argentine invasion of the Falkland Islands. Hundreds of thousands of Italian industrial workers marched in major cities today in a 4-hour general strike, protesting government economic austerity measures. Police estimated the crowds in Rome and Milan topped 100,000 each. The strike brought nearly all industrial production to a halt, and newspapers did not publish for a day. Another 60-year show, Amerasian children are scheduled to leave Vietnam for Thailand next week. Officials at a relief agency in Bangkok say it will be the biggest group ever permitted to leave by communist authorities. Vietnam has released 58 mixed-race children in the past 4 months. There were as many as 40,000 Amerasian children fathered by U.S. soldiers living in Vietnam. And
soldiers and their families here in Germany are starting to line up their vacation schedules for the year.
And that's just what we're going to do on our next report. From the Armed Forces Recreation Center in Chiemsee, Specialist Ralph Stinson, AFN News.
Tonight at 10, Specialist Stinson visits Berchtesgaden, another beautiful Bavarian city and home of another AFRC recreation center. Well, American families and soldiers certainly have a wonderful opportunity to travel around over here on their tour, thanks to Uncle Sam, who makes a very nice travel agent, doesn't he?
That's right. The Army brings the people here, and some people choose to make Germany reasons to make it their home for different reasons. But some have chosen Germany to make their home for reasons, as NBC's Dan Bernard introduces us to one of those people. She makes music in Frankfurt.
Today, the citizens of Butzbach presented Seuss with a check for almost 16,000 marks they'd collected as a goodwill gesture following the bombings. Floyd?
Back in the States, 2 men accused of trying to extort money from the Gallo Winery by threatening to poison bottles of wine are in a Houston jail now. They were arrested by FBI agents Sunday and ordered held on bonds of $200,000 each. William Harris ought to know better than to take rides from strangers. The 18-year-old led Pittsburgh police on a wild 6-mile car chase yesterday. He then dumped the vehicle and hitched a ride. Unfortunately for him, the drivers that stopped to pick him up were 2 police officers. The detective said Harris jumped in the car thinking he was getting a ride. He was charged with numerous driving violations, including running 12 red lights and driving without a license. More news in a minute.
Our middle name.
Auto shows adorn the sports schedules at this time of year. One of the older shows in the United States is in Detroit. The 67th Annual Detroit Auto Show opened up in Cobo Hall. The theme of this year's show was We're Revved Up and featured racy cars and race car drivers. The exhibitions also featured current and future automobiles. The show is sponsored by the 224 members of the Detroit Auto Dealers Association. The All-American displays featured 400 trucks, cars, and specialty cars, plus entertainment. The car shows helped the auto buff over the cold winter. Milt Fitzwater, AFN Sports.
That's sports for now. PFC Floyd Vasquez, I understand you have a racy story for us tonight.
Yes, I do. This isn't a foot race, but what promises to be one of the better races of 1983 gets underway May 1st in China. Some 500 drivers and 200 cars are expected at the Hong Kong to Peking Motor Rally. The winners will share $80,000 in prizes. The race has some unusual surprises. The speed limit will be 40 miles per hour in urban areas, but could be slower in some parts of the countryside because the people are so curious about the racers, they form a human corridor around the cars. AFN Television News will continue right after this.
Hey, Sanders.
Bird dropping, James. Have you ever reported bird droppings? Is that in your forecast?
No, we don't have any designation for bird droppings at all. That sounds like a sticky situation. But they have more than bird droppings in that part of the country. A lot of snow is occurring in the Rockies and still is.
Good evening.
AFN News is compiled from the major American networks, wire services, and public affairs offices.